In the Veterans Book Project, Monica Haller collaborated with veterans who have been affected by the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan by gathering, assembling, and publishing their photographs, their notes and recollections in a series of print-on-demand books. These 50 volumes, she calls them containers, serve on a number of different levels, from simply archiving or re-articulating the experience for these veterans and their families, to contributing to a larger, more complex history of the impact of these wars. Now, if you haven't been to the garage to see this show, you do one thing before you leave, please do that. It's really a powerful experience. Spend some time with these books. They're unlike anything I've ever seen. Monica's a visual artist. She's got a background in peace and conflict studies, and she explores these long-term collaborations using anything within reach, often photography or video and writing. Please welcome Monica Haller.
I think Vince kind of started to introduce it for me. I'm here to talk about a particular project that's here at the festival called the Veterans Book Project. And as Vince said, it's a library of 50 books that digs into the memories and the photos and the images and the materials of people who've been part of the recent US-led wars, primarily Iraq and Afghanistan, but with lots of exceptions. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how the project got started, some of the process, and just a couple of the images to try and highlight some of the content of all of these books. So this is the library of books that Vince is describing is in the garage. And since we're at a photo festival, I thought I'd start out with Robert Capa, his famous advice: if your pictures aren't good enough, you're not close enough. And at one level, I think this project is following that advice in that it's made up of people who've been close to war, and sometimes in very different ways from each other. And I think the thing they have in common, among others, I'm sure, is that they're all people and materials that are right here in the United States, in this country, where we are launching the wars, but not talking about them enough, in my opinion. Back in 2005, when I started this work, not necessarily this project, but the work with the wars, that's how I felt. I felt I wasn't hearing enough, it wasn't close enough, it wasn't real enough, it just wasn't enough. So each of the books are by individuals. This one, they're Iraqis, they're soldiers, a lot of soldiers and veterans who've been part of the wars, family members who've lost people. This book is by Drew Cameron, who's an Iraq War veteran, and he never fired a shot, but sometimes really wanted to. This book is by Zainab Jawar, who's Iraqi and lost both of her legs when a US errant missile landed on her bed and didn't detonate. And she ended up in the US through a series of incredibly miraculous events to get treatment and rehabilitation with her prosthetic limbs, and that's where we made her book. This book is by Juliet Madsen, who survives and lives with a brain injury, and she included in her book her family photos from her family photo album, and is talking about the wars that they all live with. This is a photo by Nate Lewis, and he is, again, an Iraq War veteran, and is working now today as a poet. And this book is by Sudad Abdul Hussein, and he was 16 when he wrote his, and he kind of came to it because he saw some of the other books in his class in high school, and he saw these images by soldiers, by veterans, and he decided he wanted to write about their photos from his perspective and his memories that include awesome memories with his grandmother and with his family and of living in his home country from the US. And these are images from Sarah Kanan, who is Iraqi and was born in a refugee camp in Iran, and then was able to return to Iraq after Saddam's regime fell, and as a teenager, actually. And then eventually, for a lot of reasons, ended up in the US. And her book is, about a lot of things, as many of them are. but is dealing with a very complex identity and a complex personal history of Iraq. So the authors themselves first disseminate or deploy the books to the audiences that they choose, that they have in mind. And really, they tell me who those audiences are. And I have to say, I learn a lot about who is and who wants to be and who should be reading the books based on what the authors tell me. So this project started with one book that I did with an Iraq War veteran and his image archive from Abu Ghraib prison when he was there in 2003 to 2004. And his name is Rile Charbonneau, and the book is called Rile and His Story. And the book came out of basically our conversation over a course of about 3 years. And it started in 2005, like I said, when I kind of started this work. And again, because if you kind of can think back, we were 2 years into the war in Iraq, and at that time I felt I wasn't hearing enough about it. It felt ongoing and endless and quite silent. And again, I just myself didn't feel close enough. And so I contacted an old friend from college, kind of a distant friend, contacted someone who was close to it in one particular way. When Riley and I started talking, I learned that he had all sorts of images that he didn't have any memory of making, and he didn't remember the events themselves. And so, right away, of course, I started thinking about the camera as a prosthetic device, which it is in most cases, a lot of cases. But in this case, was recording events that his memory had suppressed. So if Riley was using the camera as a kind of to record events his memory had suppressed, if he was using it this way in combat, the camera, what could be the roles, or what were the roles for him of these resulting photos now that he was at home? What were they for him, and what could they be for me, and what could they be for the rest of us, and should they? So these were the kinds of questions I was exploring and got to explore with Riley through this book. So I'm trained as a photographer, but here I was more interested in dealing with the materials that already exist, that people already have made, and learning about them together. Photos provide the chain of events that lead your mind into a state where it is okay to kill somebody. If you don't remember the sequence of events that took you there, you can believe you were a monster. So this is a picture that Riley took when he was in a part of a convoy going underneath this overpass. And what he's looking at in this picture when he took it and talks about it is the truck that's up on the bridge. And when he looks at the photo, he remembers, like, okay, we were like, who is this? What do we do? Do you shoot him? Do you not? Everybody thought about it, and I've got a camera in one hand and I've got a gun in the other hand, and I don't really know what to do, so I guess I'll just take a picture. And so in this particular case, that's what he did. And so for me, I'm thinking about the different ways people use the camera. And in here, I think one way is that it's used as a kind of a way to have some sort of power or have some sort of control in a situation where he felt powerless. And Susan Sontag writes about this in On Photography. She's talking in particular about tourists in this case, where they use the camera when as a way to do something. When you're not doing anything, when you can't do anything, at least you can do something. And I think that's one way it happens here. Another thing, of course, that struck me when we talked about this photo and other people talk about similar photos is the kind of the arbitrary or the quickness with which people have to make and do make these kinds of decisions. So someone's life is ended, or it's not. And in this case, the person who was on top of the bridge was an ally. The middle of the book is the section we kind of call the Mascal section, and this were big events when there was mortars that came into the prison and were mass casualties. That Riley again was a nurse. He was the charge nurse in the emergency room. So I always struggle with how to present this work when I'm projecting it to an audience, because really, what I want you to be able to do is sit with it and work through it in your lap, kind of on your own terms. So I really, after all these years, still don't know if I have a good solution for it. We went through all kinds of ideas and ways of how to deploy this work, and of course, if we should in the first place. We tried projecting. We thought about projecting. I was working at MIT at the time with a bunch of people in the media lab around the wars, and so I was thinking about embedding them in prosthetic devices and all these kinds of different ways of mobility and ways to try to like I said, deploy the images. And eventually kind of came back to the medium of the book, which is this medium that we know, and that was important in this way. The kind of the possibilities for the book being democratic was very exciting to me. I wanted it to be able to move beyond the walls of the gallery and into people's laps and into people's homes. I liked imagining that this book and then the veterans' books could be on the bookshelf in someone's home next to a family album or something like that. So, the mobility of the books was the important, and at the same time, the stability of it for these materials that sometimes sit on people's hard drives, that are unstable, that are memories, that are traumatic memories that are moving around. So the other thing is that the kind of linear nature of the book contrasted with the kind of chaotic nature of these materials. We used the traditional book that has page numbers, that moves from left to right, and somehow paradoxically those parameters gave us the freedom to kind of break into a messier narrative, or break out of the narrative structure into a kind of messier narrative structure. And we have pages that overlap and intersect. And when I was designing this along with a graphic designer, I was thinking a lot about memory and traumatic memory, and how memories overlap and intersect. So, of course, the conflicts today are the most photographed and being used in a lot of ways that we can talk about if you'd like, that are important and interesting. And at the same time, soldiers have been taking pictures in combat for a long time. This is a photo of my grandfather's that I found when I was a little girl. And he was a World War II veteran, and was one of the first tanks to kind of roll into the concentration camp Nordhauser in Germany, which became East Germany in Turing. So the back says April 14th, 1945, Nordhauser, Germany. Workers burying concentration camp victims, Polish and Russian victims. I saw this. And it's the I saw this that I feel today. It's this simple statement, and as if he were trying to prove it to himself, or just the simple fact that that it existed. And I think at some level is one of the most primary parts of a photographic act, to say that this happened. Even if history is rewritten, it can't be refuted, or at least to say that this is my experience that happened, that part can't be refuted. And I was young, very young when I found this photo. I remember having it in my hand. It was about 2 inches. It was very tiny. I don't remember how I got it in my hand. I was probably, I don't know age. It was that those memories aren't really attached to age, 5, 6. I don't remember how I got it. I remember being in the basement at my grandfather's house in his office with all the boxes, and I remember the picture. These are the things I remember. Later on, my mom and I found out more about it through doing some research and having his boxes and boxes of photos and all of their writing on the back. But we don't know from him because he never talked about it. And my mom said that he would have, had anyone asked, but no one asked. And I think I don't think I'm alone in having this experience. The more people I talk to, and I imagine some of you here know this experience, it seems common. And so therefore, we have the Veterans Book Project. So for this project, I designed the system, which is to say the workshop where the books get made, the software, and the wish, let's say, for this library to exist. The workshops happen, this is where the books get made, and the workshops happened around the United States over about 3 years. And they take place over about 10 days to 2 weeks, and that varies a little bit depending on the community. There are 4 to 6 authors at each, so it's small, it's kind of intimate thing. And that one was in Portland, at Portland State University. This one is in San Jose, California. The workshops happen at universities. They happen like this one in an art festival and in very different, a biennial. And so they happen in different contexts. They happen with different organizations. Once people are inside the workshops, some of the process is very one-on-one and very quiet and intimate. This is John Turner, who's going through his materials from his 3 deployments. It was the first time he'd kind of opened his rucksacks with all of his writing since those deployments, so he took time with it. This is a workshop in Minneapolis where there's a writing editor, Hasina and Sarah Kanan, and me were kind of sequencing and editing. And the workshops take a whole team of people, and in fact there are people in the audience right now who've been part of it, and it is very much a mutual kind of experience where it takes lots of us to make it happen. So this is the software, and I kind of saw the software as a kind of very practical place and also conceptually a place that we could ground a lot of these materials. So, you know, it archives and has an automatic save that happens pretty often. And this is where people make the books. It's got a design template embedded in it, and so that people aren't focused on the design in it. And when I was creating the software along with the coder, I was thinking about, you know, the very real experience people are having of multiple voices, of conflicting narratives. I wanted to make room for a lot of that to happen. So some of this had very simple design decisions that went into it then, like different colored pages, and then the authors can use them however they want, or blank pages. Like I said, I wanted to make room for conflicting voices that happen within the individual book. Maybe someone is speaking very presently or speaking more kind of philosophically. And then they happen within the library. There are a lot of books that don't necessarily agree with each other. And for me, this is about being able to have histories plural and allow those disagreements and those contradictions to live together. I'd like to talk for a few minutes about a couple images just to give a little sample of some of the content in the books. And I'll start with Ala. This is Ala's photo, Ala al-Ali. She has a book, and she is actually the girl in the photo. This is her picture, and she had it made. She grew up in a city where she was growing up with soldiers, a lot of conflict, and so she got to know some of them. And she thought, I want my own pictures of that. They have theirs, and I want mine. And so she got a disposable camera. You know, she did this all kind of in secret against her father's will, because of course, being seen with the soldiers and kind of consorting with them could put her family in a lot of danger by being an ally in a way. But she made friends with them, with different people. This is a note to her before she left, before someone left. And eventually, I could talk about Ala for a long time. Eventually, when she was 18 and finishing her first set of studies and going on to the next, she was seeing that it was going to be impossible to continue studying because of the sectarian violence. In fact, it was impossible. It was happening because of the sectarian violence in her city. And so she and her sister, I mean, it's really, you need to read her book to get the full, I can't do it justice, but she and her sister, like, over time scrounged together money, and she got a passport and went to Syria. And this was, very much against her father's wishes, who thought, like, an 18-year-old girl, a Muslim girl, cannot leave by herself. And, she said, like, look, I refuse to live like this. I'm not going to live like this. Like, you've normalized this violence, and I won't. And she did. She went to Syria as a refugee, and eventually, again, through a very complex series of actions, ended up in the United States, and then now is in college there. So, and her family is all back in Iraq, and her sisters and her parents, and living in very violent situations. And I would not wish this situation that she has to face daily, watching her family there, upon anyone. But she does, and she has reconnected with some of the soldiers who she got to know when she was living in Iraq, in her hometown. And they're close. I mean, she worries about a couple of the soldiers. They're not doing so well, she says, and so she's actually very supportive in a lot of ways. And she thinks about them as family, in her U.S. family. And so in a way, these pictures for her have become kind of family photos as well. This is a photo of Omar Columbus, and I want to try. Omar talks about this photo, and he talks about this photo, not me, in an amazing way. And I'm going to try here. I don't know if I should. It's totally an experiment. You can tell me, but I'm going to try. So, Omar was stationed in Saudi Arabia at Sultan Air Force Base at the beginning of Operation Iraqi Freedom. And his job was he was working at the beginning of the war, like I said. And so after a few months of being there, he was awarded a award for outstanding achievement. And so he talks about this photo as like one of the proudest days of his life. There he was, like, doing America's business, and he was given an award. And he's like, man, I wish my mom could see this. He's from a small town in North Carolina, and he wanted his mom to see this. So when he was given the certificate, the colonel came over and gave him the certificate and gave him a white marker and said, congratulations, you can go out to the bomb dump, which is where they prepare the bombs for deployment, and write anything you want on one of these bombs. And so he did. So he wrote, "Greetings, Saddam," from Omar, and he wrote his mom's name and his dad's name and his sister's name and his brother's name and his aunt and his uncle's names. And then later that day, it was pushed off. So fast forward 12 years, and Omar talks about how personal this is. Now he imagines an Iraqi person, like, picking up shards of this bomb where their house once was, or in a crater, and seeing these names. And he thinks, yeah, I did this. Like, I did this, and now so did my mom and my dad and my brother and my sister and my aunt and my uncle, and I brought them to the war with me. And that's what this picture means to Omar. This is a photo from Pamela Olson, and she was stationed in Puerto Rico in 1983 and was raped there by one of her colleagues. And when we met in 2010, Pamela wanted to talk about it. She was ready, and she never had before. And this photo is at the beginning of her book. She put it at the beginning of her book, and it means a lot to me because, for a lot of reasons, but in the picture itself, I kind of see the way that they're shaking hands. I mean, they're meeting in the middle. It is in the middle, their handshake, but she's like already kind of pulling away, or maybe wasn't there and is timid, right? And that's how I met Pamela initially. Her handwriting was even shaky when she started. And by the end, she was sharing. And I don't know if she's really ever stopped speaking now. It started, and I don't know that it'll stop. And when I say speaking, I'm referring to like Foucault's kind of speech, parésia, which is like fearless speech. So in that speech, it's what's important to us is the role of the truth teller, or truth telling is an activity. And I think that's what a lot of the authors are doing. There's also a spread from Pamela's book. This is a photo of Mike Jackson's in his book. And his book is about, again, a lot of things, but he's writing about, he's an Iraq War veteran. He's writing about the war that we fight abroad and the wars we fight at home, which are the ones we don't talk about as much. And that's the war that we're fighting on the streets and in our penitentiaries. And he grew up with all the men, as a child, all the men in his life either incarcerated or having died of gun violence. And so that's what he's writing about. And one of the things, among many, that he talks about in his book and that I think about a lot is expendability, and whose lives are we choosing are expendable and whose aren't. And this is a philosophical choice that we make and that our government makes, and it's about whose lives are worth grieving. And then we make choices based on that in some ways, and it's a philosophical choice. And at some level, he's talking about this in the book. And he blocked out in this picture the woman's face for identity reasons. But I think it speaks a lot to this topic as well, this issue of expendability and grief, and whose lives are we willing to grieve or put forward as valuable. It's a strategy we used also in Rile's book. Again, it was for practical reasons. These were people Iraqis who worked in U.S. bases, but because of working there, their lives were very much in danger. And so wherever, even if the book, we just didn't want to take any chances. So this is what Rile wanted to do. But it was also an issue that I was seeing, I'm like, where are we talking about Iraqis? And it seemed the only place that we were in that book was where their faces were gone. So the books themselves of the Veterans Book Project are all available online as free PDF downloads, and then they're print on demand so that, again, the authors themselves can anyone can buy them right away. The authors, like I said, choose their first audience, and they are often family, friends, other people, and they do their own activities. This is Jesse Albrecht, who's doing a talk with a public access television show in his hometown of Iowa City. This is Phil Studer in the middle, the blonde hair, whose brother was killed in Afghanistan while disarming an IED, and he curated his own exhibition of the Veterans Book Project Library, and it was exhibited at the IFP in Minneapolis. Pamela, who you saw earlier, who was stationed in Puerto Rico, she used her book to get more VA benefits, which she'd been fighting for 10 years and really had never been recognized. So she used her book for that, and they used them in all sorts of ways. When the books all come back together as part of this larger unit in the library and they're installed, I see them as an installation, as kind of a reading room, which is very simply and basically trying to create a place where people can kind of settle down and sit down and just read and have time in quiet to do that. We tried to create this installation so that anyone could use the materials that they have or with the budgets they have to show the exhibition. So this is in the Netherlands at Photodoc, and the one before was at the Milwaukee Art Museum. I really see the installation as a place to build kind of a community of readers, and a place where people can disagree and discuss with each other and start their own actions. When I'm involved in the exhibitions, we do this very simple thing that's called a reading workshop, where people get together and read quietly and then discuss. And then professors or curators invite professors to bring their classes, and they do in different areas like photo and design for sure, Middle Eastern studies, communications classes, criminology classes, nursing classes. These are all the kinds of classes and professors who've used the books. This is a design class who made their own book based on their archives around the wars, and they each took a number of page spreads and built the book together as a class. And, you know, if you can imagine, and probably a lot of you can because of everyone being different ages, but a lot of the students were 8, 9, 10, 12 when the wars started. And so the kind of the vocabulary and the rhetoric is like embedded into people's lives, and they have a lot of material. And actually, if you ask, people have a lot to say about it. And I think that I'm speaking to the choir in a way, because I imagine it's similar here. Oh, this is more reading. I think the photographer in me sees people reading as like one of the more beautiful images. I think one of my questions among many today, you know, over a decade after these particular conflicts started, is, you know, what should we be talking about today, and how should we use the books? And that's where I'll end. So I didn't quite get to my plan of stopping short, but hopefully we have a little time to talk together and have questions. Thank you.